Before we drift into the quiet cradle of ancient time, let me ask you something gentle, something that stirs curiosity inside your sleepy mind. Have you ever wondered when the first human heart learned to fear the dark? When the first spark of fire broke the endless night and painted warm light across ancient stone? Who looked at the stars millions of years ago and felt the first pull of wonder? When did a simple creature take its first thoughtful breath and slowly become us? Tonight, we return to that silent threshold, to the moment humanity opened its eyes for the very first time, when the world spoke only in wind and shadows, and survival shaped every heartbeat. Before we begin this gentle journey into the dawn of humanity, I invite you to relax and drift softly with me. And if this calming story brings you comfort, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment where in the world you are listening from. Now let your eyes grow heavier, your breathing slower, and allow the ancient world to unfold quietly around you. In the earliest ages of our world, long before a single human step pressed against cooling earth, the planet moved through ages of silence and slow awakening, its mountains rising like tired giants stretching after endless sleep, its oceans swirling with a deep, ancient rhythm that sounded like the breath of time itself. And within this vast and restless cradle, life began to stir in gentle, unhurried waves, each small movement shaping the long path that would one day lead to us. For in those distant days, the air carried a warmth that drifted across wide, empty plains and shadows, moved softly beneath towering trees that had never known the sound of voices. The rivers carved their patient lines across stone, as if writing the first chapters of existence, and the wind swept over open valleys, carrying the scent of wet soil and the quiet pulse of new beginnings. While in the dim corners of dense forests, small shapes started to shift and crawl and rise, creatures testing their strength against the heavy weight of the world, learning the balance between fear and survival, light and darkness, stillness and motion. And through countless seasons of change, the earth shaped them as gently as a sculptor shaping clay, each generation growing stronger, more aware, more capable of feeling the world around them, until among these early beings, one lineage began to hold a spark just barely brighter than the rest, a subtle glimmer of curiosity that pushed them to lift their heads a little higher, to listen a little longer to the murmur of leaves and the whisper of water, to wonder at the shifting patterns of the sky and the distant cry of unknown animals across the plain. And with each passing age, that curiosity slowly deepened, becoming a quiet force, guiding their steps as they moved across the land, searching for warmth and safety, huddling together in trembling nights where predators roamed and cold winds scraped across their skin. Yet even in their fear, there grew a fragile bond, a sense that staying close meant living another day, that shared warmth meant shared survival, and that two hearts beating side by side made the darkness feel a little less endless. So they learned to travel as small wandering groups, watching the seasons turn, following the paths of rivers and herds and sunlight. And though their voices were only broken sounds and soft calls carried over the grasslands, those sounds slowly learned to shape, meaning simple expressions of warning, comfort, hunger, and recognition. And as the sky faded into dusk each evening, their eyes lifted toward the dim glow of early stars, wondering, perhaps without understanding, why the night felt so vast, so full of secrets, yet somehow gentle enough to fall asleep. Beneath, and in these long-forgotten nights, the first traces of humanity began to flicker like embers warming inside a sheltered cave, as an instinct grew into thought, thought into memory, and memory into the earliest shadow of understanding that the world was more than a place to fear. It was a place to learn from, to watch, to feel, to inhabit with growing awareness. So even though they could not yet imagine the distant future, they were slowly walking toward the tools. Food, fire, shelter, language, stories, and civilizations that would one day rise from their quiet footsteps. They carried within them the faint beginning of what it meant to be human, a delicate rhythm of wonder and survival that guided their hands, their breaths, their movements through a world both dangerous and beautiful. And in this rhythm, the first chapter of our ancient story began to unfold as softly as a dream drifting through the stillness of a long-forgotten night. In the shifting dawn of the ancient world, as ages turned with the slow patience of drifting stone, our early ancestors moved deeper into the vastness of their surroundings, discovering each day a little more about the land that cradled them in silence, drifting forward with quiet steps as the forests around them grew thicker and darker, roots tangling beneath their feet, broad leaves dripping cool beads of water from the nightly mist. And though they did not yet form words into stories, they felt the world through instinct and sensation, noticing how certain paths carried the scent of safety, while others trembled with hidden danger, guiding their movements in soft, cautious rhythms. And so they learned to travel with careful patience, guided by memories shaped through countless small moments, when survival depended on listening to the softest rustle in the grass or the distant crack of a branch. And in these early wanderings, they began to understand that the earth itself spoke in many quiet languages. Each breath of wind whispering gently, each ripple of water stirring a faint warning, each shifting shadow offering something worth remembering, as though the world itself hummed softly around them, urging them onward. As seasons turned, they followed migrating herds across open plains, watching animals drift like slow-moving clouds across the golden landscape, their presence offering both nourishment and risk. And in their pursuit, our early kin developed a deeper sense of rhythm and distance sensing, how far they could go in a single day when sunlight was thinning, and when the cool air pressed close around them, hiding prowling shapes in the tall grass, their steps growing slower, quieter, as the evening winds brushed past. In their nights, gathered around fragile sparks of warmth, they huddled beneath overhanging cliffs or low branches, feeling the soft crackle of heat deep within smoldering sticks. And though fire was not yet, their stu command had flickered in their dreams, glowing faintly in the darkness, calling to something deep within. Their bones a promise of safety, waiting to be claimed, a soft light pulsing like a heartbeat in the shadows. Through these long, restless nights, their minds sharpened as slowly as the erosion of stone, thought unfolding in delicate threads, awareness rising like faint dawn spreading across the horizon. And though they had no words for it yet, they felt the difference between simple memory and emerging curiosity, a gentle tug within them, urging them to look beyond familiar trails, to peer from hilltops, to watch the wandering herds and drifting clouds, and the wide sky above them, shimmering with quiet mysteries. In these glimmers of awareness, the seeds of innovation were planted for necessity, taught them to break branches in useful ways, to scrape stones together until sharper edges formed to test new shapes and sounds. And though these early tools were crude accidental at times, they marked the slow rise towards something new, a subtle shift that set them apart from the other creatures who shared the land, guiding them softly but surely toward change. As generations passed, they discovered the strength of cooperation, sharing small findings of food, lifting the injured from dangerous ground. Their steps in unison forming a gentle harmony that kept the darkness at the edge of their circle. And though language still slept quietly within them, communication grew through soft calls, slow gestures, and rhythmic sounds tapped on hollow logs or murmured across open valleys, carrying hints of warning, comfort, and belonging. And as the world moved through storms and heat and drought and seasons of abundance, these early humans adapted with quiet determination, guided by survival SC's steady pull and the faint flicker of insight that encouraged them to remain watchful, patient, connected to one another, held together by shared instinct and slowly growing understanding. And so, Chapter 2 unfolds in the steady breath of ancient winds, as the dawn of human awareness deepened, forming the first roots of community, resilience, and curiosity, elements that would one day grow into culture, thought, and the earliest sparks of a mind capable of imagining more than the world directly before its eyes, glowing softly like a whisper before sleep. As the ages drifted forward like slow-moving tides, our early ancestors began to sense the shaping of patterns in the world around them, patterns that hinted at a deeper understanding, still far beyond their reach, yet close enough to stir the edges of thought. For in the quiet mornings, when soft light filtered through branches and mist curled low across the ground, they noticed how certain stones held sharper edges than others, how some trees bent in ways that offered shelter, while others signaled danger through their scent, or through the insects that clung to their bark. And through these subtle observations, they grew more attuned to the delicate balance of their environment, learning which rivers carried gentler currents, which paths led toward richer hunting grounds, and which caves held the steady warmth needed to endure colder nights. And even though they lacked the structure of spoken language, their minds began weaving fragments of memory into something more cohesive, a tapestry of experience that taught them to expect change, to prepare for the shifting moods of nature, and to understand that survival depends not only on instinct, but also on the ability to adapt from one season to the next. As this awareness deepened, they began experimenting with the materials around them, not through deliberate innovation, but through the repetition of simple actions carried across generations. A stone struck against another, producing a sharp flake. A branch split to reveal fibers strong enough for binding. A hollowed piece of wood used for scooping water. Each discovery small, yet meaningful, drifting quietly into the growing pool of shared knowledge. And although each discovery appeared small and scattered across vast stretches of time. These moments formed the earliest glimmers of human ingenuity, a slow accumulation of understanding that moved them one quiet step at a time closer to shaping the world around them rather than simply reacting to it. In the evenings, when darkness settled across the land and distant calls echoed through the plains, they gathered in small clusters, their bodies pressed together against the cold, their breath rising in soft, rhythmic clouds into the chilled air. And within these gatherings, emotional bonds deepened, creating a fragile but vital sense of belonging that strengthened their will to survive for alone. The world was vast and merciless, but together they formed a living shield, a shared pulse that offered warmth, comfort, and the faint beginnings of community. And during these long nights, the glow of fire still eluded them, yet they watched with fascination whenever lightning struck dry grass, or when embers appeared at the base of smoldering trees, their wide eyes reflecting the trembling orange light as something ancient stirred within them. A wordless recognition that fire held power, safety, warmth, the ability to push back against the darkness, a promise resting just beyond their grasp. Even though they could not claim this force for themselves, the idea of it lived quietly in their minds, waiting for the day when hands would shape sparks and protect them from the threats that prowled beyond the faint light of the moon. Across vast landscapes, they followed trails carved by migrating animals, their steps tracing routes that stretched far beyond familiar territories. And in these wanderings, they encountered other groups whose movements mirrored their own, their faces different, yet similar enough to spark a flicker of recognition, glowing softly with an instinct. And though these meetings were cautious, filled with tension and silence, punctuated by wary glances, they also allowed the exchange of simple knowledge, gestures pointing toward water, the direction of herds, or the presence of predators. And through these brief interactions, the earliest threads of connection between separate communities began to form, stretching across valleys, forests, and plains like invisible strands linking one family of humans to another. As the seasons cycled through rains, heat, winds, and cold, their bodies adapted with quiet resilience, skin thickening against harsh climates, muscles strengthening from endless travel, senses sharpening with each challenge posed by the wild. And through these gradual changes, they became more capable explorers of their world, learning to rely not only on instinct, but also on the growing spark of awareness that lived inside them, guiding them gently forward. And in this slow unfolding of their journey, gently reveals how these early humans stepped further into the realm of rising intelligence, deeper into the formation of social bonds, and closer to the threshold where the first true shift in human evolution would one day take shape, guided by the persistent rhythm of survival. Curiosity and the ancient hope carried silently within each breath of their long-forgotten lives. In the unfolding tapestry of early life, as the sun crept across distant horizons, our early ancestors moved with a quiet rhythm. Born from countless generations of observation and survival, each step measured yet fluid, each breath drawn in tune with the world around them. For in those long-vanished days, the earth spoke in subtle whispers that could only be heard by ears attuned to patience and stillness. The rustle of grass, as a predator, moved unseen. The faint shimmer of water reflecting a fleeting shaft of sunlight, the tremor of earth beneath their feet signaling distant storms, all weaving themselves into a growing awareness that shaped the way they walked, rested, hunted, and gathered. And as they learned to interpret the faint cues of the land, they also began to experiment with their hands, touching and shaping the objects around them, scraping stones together to reveal sharper edges, pounding sticks against bark and hollow logs, observing the results again and again, until the repetition of their actions revealed patterns that slowly birthed the earliest understanding of cause and effect. In this way, the boundary between creature and thinker began to blur, and though they still relied heavily on instinct, the spark of deliberate intention flickered within them, like the first glimmer of a distant fire, glowing softly at the edge of awareness. In the still nights, when shadows stretched long across the plains, they huddled together beneath rocky outcrops or within natural shelters, listening to the chorus of nocturnal life, the distant call of unknown beasts, the whisper of wind threading through the trees. And though fear was ever present, there was also a deepening sense of curiosity, a gentle pull toward exploring the darkness, rather than simply recoiling from it. As generations passed, these groups of early humans became more adept at moving through the landscape, reading the signals embedded in every leaf, stone, and current. Each member learning the subtle art of observation and memory, storing countless small lessons within the mind, ready to be recalled in a moment of need. And with each remembered lesson, their confidence grew, allowing them to venture farther from familiar ground, encountering new challenges. Their steps guided by knowledge gathered slowly, quietly, over the course of many lives. And slowly, they discovered that by working together, they could achieve far more than any individual alone. For one could spot a predator while another gathered fruit, or one could carry the heaviest branch, while others cleared a path, each small act reinforcing the bonds that allowed survival to stretch beyond the limits of a single body. Through these bonds, the earliest sense of community began to emerge. A fragile yet vital connection rooted in shared experience, mutual aid, and the instinctual understanding that together, they were stronger than the sum of their solitary parts. As the seasons cycled, bringing rains, winds, and long dry spells, their bodies and minds adapted incrementally, skin toughening, muscles growing resilient, senses sharpening with each passing challenge. And yet alongside these physical changes, their mental capacities expanded as well. Subtle thoughts forming about the world beyond immediate necessity. An awareness that life held more than the pursuit of food, the avoidance of danger, or the endurance of the elements. These nascent reflections created space for imagination, curiosity, planning, and the first stirrings of abstract thought, which over countless generations would grow into language, symbols, art, and the earliest expressions of culture. In the quiet moments beneath starlit skies, when the night stretched endlessly and the world felt both immense and intimate, they took comfort in small rituals, simple patterns of movement or sound that brought reassurance and cohesion, forming a rhythm that was both practical and soothing, a lullaby of survival and connection echoing through their days and nights. Even before fire was fully mastered or tools refined, they had begun to cultivate a profound understanding of time, space, and relationship. A knowledge passed silently from one generation to the next, in gestures, expressions, and shared experience. And as the earth shifted imperceptibly beneath them, as rivers carved canyons and winds reshaped plains, the early humans of Chapter 4 navigated their world with a growing awareness of self and others, guided by instinct, curiosity, memory, and the faint yet persistent desire to explore, to understand, and to connect, forming the enduring threads that would one day weave the vast and complex tapestry of human existence, stretching quietly into all the ages yet to come. As the long rhythms of the ancient world continued their patient unfolding, our early ancestors began to encounter one of the most transformative forces they would ever know, the power of fire. Not yet fully tamed, it appeared in flashes from lightning strikes, in smoldering trees, in volcanic sparks that fell from the sky into dry grasses and hollowed earth. Each flicker of orange light was a fragile promise against the cold darkness that had always dominated their nights. And though they could not yet create fire at will, they watched with wide eyes as it consumed dry material, radiating warmth and light, teaching them without words that heat could protect and illuminate, that movement could be contained and guided, and that a single glowing ember held the potential to transform hunger into nourishment, fear into comfort, and solitude into gathering. When a burning branch fell from a distant tree, they learned to approach it cautiously, feeling the intense heat at a distance. The trembling glow reflected in their eyes, the way shadows danced and shrank in its light. And though some recoiled in fear, others leaned forward, driven by a deep curiosity, a silent whisper within their instincts that urged them to understand, to experiment, to see what this strange power could offer. Across countless generations, they began to notice patterns in the natural occurrences of fire, which trees were more likely to burn, which winds could carry sparks safely, which damp soil or wet leaves could smother a flame. Learning slowly through observation and accident, they gained the earliest forms of control, small beginnings that would one day blossom into mastery. As they experimented with charred branches, stones, and hollowed hollows, they discovered that fire could cook meat, transforming tough flesh into something softer, easier to digest, releasing nutrients in ways raw food never could. In doing so, they unknowingly reshaped not only their diets, but the biology of their descendants, their jaws, their teeth, their digestion, adapting over generations to this new source of energy, allowing their bodies to thrive in supporting the growth of more complex brains that could remember, plan, anticipate, and imagine far beyond immediate survival. And around these flickering embers, groups gathered, huddled together for warmth, sharing the faint beginnings of social ritual through subtle gestures, sounds, and glances. They learned to protect one another, to teach, to comfort, to notice the smallest cues of danger or safety within the circle of shared light. In the soft illumination of firelight, they saw not only the shadows of the world outside, but also the first faint recognition of each other, forming bonds of empathy, cooperation, and trust, threads that would strengthen across generations and lay the foundations of culture. As the nights passed in cycles of cold and heat, the repeated experience of gathering warmth, of shared vigilance, and of witnessing the delicate, glimmering power of fire created a rhythm that settled into their daily lives, a quiet pulse, linking individual awareness to communal survival. Each spark and ember became a teacher, each glow a guide, instructing them in patience and observation, in respect for both power and fragility. And though true mastery remained distant, the idea of control had taken root, a subtle awareness that the world could be influenced, that elements could be coaxed rather than endured, that cautious experimentation could lead to safety and advantage. As they moved through forests, across plains, along winding rivers, tracing the migration of animals and the shifting of the land, they carried this spark of understanding with them. Even when the physical fire was absent, the lessons remained, warming their thoughts, guiding their actions, shaping the rhythm of group life and the early development of planning, foresight, and innovation. Shelters, clothing, tools, and strategies would one day rise from these first quiet insights. And in the long, quiet nights when winds whispered through branches and starlight painted the plains in silver, they dreamed not with words, but with impressions, sensations, and the faintest flicker of anticipation for a world that could be shaped gently, deliberately. So chapter 5 flows through the steady heartbeat of discovery, curiosity, and cautious experimentation, marking the first transformative step in the slow unfolding of human ingenuity. Community and adaptation, laying the foundation on which all future chapters of our story would rise. In the endless sweep of time, as the world turned with quiet inevitability, our early ancestors began to notice that survival depended not only on following the patterns of seasons and animals, but also on shaping the materials around them into implements that could extend their reach and effectiveness. For the earliest tools were simple extensions of the body, stones selected for their sharp edges, branches stripped and sharpened to pierce or dig, and bones used to scrape or crack. Yet even in their simplicity, these objects represented a profound shift in the way humans interacted with their environment. For the act of selecting, shaping, and wielding an object required foresight, imagination, and repetition, qualities that slowly set humans apart from all other creatures inhabiting the same forests, plains, and river valleys. And as generations passed, these early artisans began to notice subtle variations in stones, which broke cleanly versus those that crumbled to the difference between a pointed branch that could pierce and one that snapped under pressure. Observations recorded not in words, but in memory, in gestures, and in the repetition of trial and error, so that each successive attempt refined their ability and understanding, allowing them to achieve more reliable results over time. Through this quiet accumulation of skill, they discovered that tools could amplify strength and reach, speed up food preparation, and create openings in the landscape previously inaccessible. For a single sharp stone could slice meat into smaller pieces, easier to chew and share, and a pointed stick could dig tubers from the soil or drive prey from hiding into the waiting hands of the hunters. These small innovations spread slowly across groups as young ones observed elders copying gestures and sounds that indicated function, use, and caution. Each act reinforcing social bonds and the unspoken lesson that survival improved through learning and teaching. Thus, the earliest sense of culture began to emerge as knowledge passed from hand to hand, from generation to generation, not yet captured in words, but alive in the rhythm of movement and observation. And as the world moved through cycles of rain, heat, drought, and wind, humans began to recognize that different environments require different strategies and tools. A flat stone useful for crushing seeds in one region might serve little purpose on a rocky hillside, while a long branch ideal for probing holes in marshes could not be carried effectively across open plains. So adaptability became a hallmark of the growing species, an ability to notice, remember, experiment, adjust, and apply, each choice and action feeding into the collective understanding of the group and further solidifying the bonds that held them together through danger and scarcity. For as they observed animals breaking branches, scraping soil, gathering food, humans began to mimic the functionality of the natural world, shaping raw materials to serve practical ends. And in doing so, discovered the quiet satisfaction of agency, the soft power that comes from being able to influence outcomes in an otherwise unpredictable environment. And in the evenings, beneath the canopy of stars, they gathered together in small clusters, comparing results, demonstrating techniques, sharing insights through gestures and sounds that carried meaning even without words. For the exchange of knowledge became a form of connection, as important as the provision of food or the offering of warmth. And through these gatherings, humans experienced the first subtle joys of collaboration, the shared thrill of discovery, the security of collective effort, and the gentle pride of competence passed silently from one generation to the next. And although the challenges of weather, predators, scarcity, and illness remained constant, the slow mastery of tools offered a growing sense of control over the world, a confidence that encouraged exploration beyond familiar grounds, inspiring subtle plans for what might be encountered beyond the next ridge or across the quiet bend of a river. Through these experiences, memory sharpened, attention expanded, and imagination flickered quietly within the human mind. Curiosity stretching toward the unknown and the not. So the rhythm of daily survival began to entwine with the rhythm of thought, and of innovation, each reinforcing the other, shaping a foundation for the complex behaviors of hunting, crafting, exploring, communicating, and ultimately reflecting upon existence itself. And in this slow, deliberate shaping of material, observation, and action, Chapter 6 captures the emergence of practical intelligence, ingenuity, and social learning, a cornerstone of humanity that would ripple through generations, growing ever more sophisticated as humans pressed onward through the vast, unforgiving, yet profoundly beautiful landscapes of their ancient world. Across the wide stretches of ancient plains and dense forests, our early ancestors began to experience life in ways that slowly wove together survival, community, and awareness into a coherent rhythm. Each day, a delicate balance of movement, observation, and instinct as they tracked the migrations of animals, the seasonal growth of plants, and the hidden patterns of the land. For hunting and gathering required not only keen senses, but also patience, timing, and cooperation, one hunter noticing subtle signs of footprints, another listening for the faintest rustle in the underbrush, a third carrying sharpened tools, ready to strike or defend. And together, through these quiet, coordinated efforts, they learned that success depended upon shared attention, shared action, and an unspoken understanding that each member of the group had a role to play in the intricate dance of survival. And as they followed herds across open plains, they observed the ways prey moved, how shadows fell upon the ground when predators lurked nearby, and how the wind could carry scents both dangerous and enticing. These observations recorded silently in memory, in gestures, and in soft calls that conveyed warning, comfort, instruction, and curiosity without the need for formal language, yet building a structure of communication nonetheless. And as seasons cycled through rain and drought, heat, and cold, humans refined their methods of hunting and gathering, adjusting strategies to the rhythm of the land, choosing when to move slowly and quietly, when to track from afar, and when to strike quickly and decisively, for failure could mean hunger, injury, or death, while success brought nourishment, warmth, and the reinforcement of social bonds. Through countless repetitions of these small yet critical actions, humans began to develop a sense of foresight, the ability to anticipate the movements of animals, the growth of plants, and the behavior of fellow humans. A subtle understanding that the world had predictable elements, which could be observed, learned, and used to advantage. And within this growing awareness, the earliest forms of planning emerged, not as conscious strategy, but as instinct enhanced by experience, a rhythm of expectation and response guiding steps, actions, and decisions with a quiet, steady pulse that could be felt across the generations. For these groups learned that moving together, sharing information, and watching one another closely increased survival far more than solitary effort, and that the presence of companions provided comfort, courage, and stability in a world full of hidden dangers and uncertainty. So the bonds of community strengthened gradually, forming a network of reliance, empathy, and trust, built not on formal rules, but on shared experience, repetition, and the silent understanding that caring for one another ensured the continuation of life itself. And as the nights grew long and cold, they discovered the subtle power of collective vigilance, one pair of eyes scanning the darkness for predators, another listening for the softest footstep, while a third kept the youngest or weakest close and safe, Through these practices, humans nurtured a delicate awareness of risk and protection, learning to respond quickly while remaining calm, knowing that each member's survival contributed to the survival of the whole. And within these nightly rituals, small sparks of comfort and rhythm emerged, the gentle sway of bodies huddled together, the soft murmur of sounds exchanged across the circle, the silent acknowledgement of warmth and safety as the embers of fire glimmered faintly, or when lightning illuminated the forest for a brief moment, teaching awe, caution, and wonder all at once. And over generations, these repeated behaviors shaped not only survival skills, but also social cohesion, memory, attention, and the first inklings of empathy. For to recognize danger or comfort in another required noticing signals, understanding their meaning, and responding in kind. An interplay that would become one of the defining features of humanity. And as they moved further into the forests and across the plains, the knowledge gained through hunting and gathering became increasingly sophisticated, from tracking subtle traces to timing actions according to the movement of herds and the cycles of daylight and moonlight. From noticing the growth of edible roots to storing and sharing knowledge of water sources, all without formal language, yet fully internalized and shared within the group. So each day became an education in observation, intuition, and cooperation, while each night reinforced the bonds of care, connection, and mutual dependence, slowly forming a pattern of life that intertwined movement, sustenance, protection, curiosity, and quiet reflection. For even in the absence of words, humans were beginning to structure their world with understanding, a rhythm that harmonized thought, action, and emotion across time and space. So, Chapter 7 unfolds as a testament to the emergence of social intelligence, cooperation, foresight, and the delicate balance between independence and interdependence that allowed humans to thrive in an unpredictable and ever-changing world. Their steps, guided by memory, observation, instinct, and the faint spark of imagination that would one day grow into culture. Planning and story, marking another steady stride in the long unfolding journey of humanity. As the ages stretched on and the early world shifted through the slow pulse of seasons, our ancestors began to experience something subtle yet profound, the gradual emergence of social structures, shaped not only by necessity, but also by awareness and memory. For survival alone was no longer enough. They learned that living in groups required coordination, cooperation, and a delicate balance of attention to both the environment and each other. For as families and small bands moved together across forests, plains, and river valleys, they discovered that sharing information about food sources, water, and danger increased their chances of survival, and that caring for the young, the sick, and the injured ensured the continuation of the group. These small acts of cooperation quietly strengthened bonds, creating a sense of belonging and shared responsibility that would echo through countless generations. And in this emerging social world, humans began to notice patterns of behavior in one another, subtle cues that communicated emotion, intention, and need, the tilt of a head, the shift of a body, the change in sound or gesture, each observation adding to a growing awareness of others as sentient beings, capable of feeling and acting in ways that influenced the collective experience. Through these insights, empathy began to take root, a recognition that attending to the needs of others could create harmony and safety, while neglect or aggression could result in conflict, danger, or loss. So early humans moved with quiet consideration, reading one another's expressions and adjusting behavior instinctively, guided by experience and memory rather than formal rules or language. And as the cycles of day and night repeated and the rhythm of seasons turned, the groups became increasingly adept at coordinating hunting and gathering efforts, sharing resources, and maintaining vigilance against predators and environmental hazards. For the life of the band depended on attention to both external threats and internal dynamics, the delicate interplay of strength, cooperation, and care. In these communal moments, humans began to develop early rituals, simple actions repeated in time that reinforced social cohesion, the placing of food beside the young, the comforting touch of a hand, the gentle encouragement of a hesitant member, all forming a rhythm of reassurance and connection that subtly strengthened the fabric of community. Over generations, these patterns became internalized, memory of practice guiding behavior without conscious thought, creating a stable environment in which young members could learn, observe, imitate, and eventually contribute to the ongoing survival of the group. And as humans continued to explore new territories, following herds, rivers, and shifting plant growth. They encountered other groups, their faces unfamiliar, yet familiar enough to stir curiosity, caution, and sometimes fear. Through these encounters, they learned to recognize difference and similarity, to negotiate space, to observe signals of intent, and to develop early forms of communication beyond immediate survival gestures. A complex layering of attention, memory, and response that would become the foundation for language and symbolic thought. Within the quiet moments beneath starlit skies, as fires flickered softly in the night or lightning briefly illuminated distant trees, humans experienced the first inklings of wonder, AEW, and reflection, noticing not only the movements of the world around them, but also the subtle stirrings within themselves, an awareness of time, place, and relation that expanded slowly with each passing year. So Chapter 8 gently unfolds as a meditation on the formation of social awareness, cooperation, and empathy, the intertwined growth of observation, memory, and experience, and the earliest glimmers of understanding that humans are not solitary creatures, but members of a complex living network in which survival, connection, and awareness of others are inseparable, marking another step along the slow path from instinct to thought, from isolated action to intentional coordination, from simple existence to the beginnings of culture, curiosity, and foresight. It highlights the steady unfolding of humanity's story. The ancient world continued its slow, unfurling rhythm, and our early ancestors began to deepen the quiet pulse of awareness that guided their lives, noticing not only the patterns of the land, the movements of animals, and the cycles of the seasons, but also the subtle stirrings within themselves, a sense that beyond immediate survival, there was something more to be observed, felt, and understood. For in the still mornings, when mist curled across plains and rivers shimmered in the weak sunlight, they began to notice the intricate dance of life around them, the ways certain plants grew near water, the paths of herds across open grasslands, the hidden layers of predators waiting silently in shadow. Through careful observation, they learned to anticipate the behavior of prey and danger, to move with patience and precision, and to store knowledge of safe places, abundant resources, and treacherous terrain within the quiet recesses of memory. As these lessons accumulated over generations, the first hints of foresight emerged, a subtle awareness that one could plan steps in advance, consider the probable outcomes of action, and make choices not solely guided by instinct, but also by recollection and reflection. Within these growing capacities, curiosity began to take hold, a gentle tug toward exploration and experimentation, to touch, bend, shape, and test the materials of the world, to watch the effects of repeated effort, and to notice the smallest differences that might hold significance. For the earliest tools had shown them that control over the environment could be achieved not only by strength, but by thought and repetition, and that subtle innovation could tilt the balance between life and death. As bands moved together through forests, plains, and river valleys, the rhythms of hunting and gathering intertwined with the rhythm of observation and communication gestures. Soft calls and learned patterns passed knowledge from one individual to another without words, yet with profound meaning, allowing experience to accumulate across time and space, and creating a sense of continuity that bound generations in an invisible web of shared understanding. In the long, quiet nights beneath the vast sky, when fire was still a fragile ally and darkness pressed close, humans began to notice the subtle patterns in the stars, the shifting glow of the moon, and the steady pulse of the natural world around them. These observations forming the earliest scaffold for a sense of time, of navigation and of cycles beyond immediate perception. Through this growing awareness, they began to grasp not only the immediate consequences of action, but also the broader rhythms that shaped life, the rise and fall of water levels, the coming and going of migrating herds, the seasonal growth of plants, and the shifting behavior of other groups of humans across the land. As these perceptions intertwined with memory and experience, the earliest forms of culture slowly emerged, simple patterns of action repeated across space and time, rituals of care, feeding, grooming, protection, and companionship, forming a rhythm that nurtured both survival and connection. Through these acts, humans began to cultivate empathy, recognizing the feelings, needs, and intentions of others, anticipating reactions, and offering comfort or assistance without explicit communication. In doing so, they created social bonds that strengthened the cohesion of the group and the likelihood of survival. Even under the harshest conditions, as generations passed, the accumulation of knowledge, experience, and foresight created an increasing capacity for problem solving and innovation. the ability to shape tools for specific purposes, to modify shelters, to improve hunting strategies, to communicate intention across distance, and to remember the successes and failures of past actions for future guidance. These developments formed the quiet groundwork of civilization, the scaffold upon which the full complexity of human thought, language, and culture would eventually be built. So, Chapter 9 gently flows through the emergence of foresight, curiosity, memory, and social intelligence, showing how early humans began to see beyond the immediate present, to anticipate, plan, and respond to the world with intention, forming the subtle rhythms of thought that would guide generations to come, and marking another delicate yet crucial step along the long unfolding journey from instinct to awareness, from survival to understanding, from isolated existence to the shared and interconnected experience that defines humanity. As the slow currents of time carried early humans across vast forests, rolling plains, and winding rivers, they began to experience the world not merely as a place of survival, but as a living, changing environment full of patterns, opportunities, and subtle dangers. For each day brought new lessons in observation, patience, and adaptation, as they traced the paths of herds, the growth cycles of plants, and the hidden signs of predators. They developed a deepening awareness of cause and effect, of timing and rhythm, of the interactions between living beings and the land itself. And through countless repetitions of movement, observation, and experimentation, humans began to refine the earliest forms of tools, selecting stones with sharper edges, branches with better leverage, and bones shaped by repeated use. These small innovations slowly increased efficiency in gathering, hunting, and preparing food, while also teaching patience, attention, and the quiet discipline of repetition. Within these cycles of learning, humans began to develop a nuanced understanding of social interaction. For survival required cooperation not only in immediate action, but also in memory of past experiences and anticipation of future needs. They learned to coordinate movements during hunts, to protect the young and weak during travel, to communicate danger or opportunity through gestures, soft calls, and rhythmic sounds that carried meaning across space and time. In these shared experiences, bonds of empathy, trust, and connection strengthened, forming the earliest framework of community, a rhythm of interdependence that reinforced both individual and collective resilience. As nights stretched long and darkness enveloped the landscape, humans discovered the subtle power of attention and vigilance, one pair of eyes scanning the horizon, another listening for the faintest disturbance, while others maintained warmth and comfort within the group. These practices nurtured a sense of security and predictability in an otherwise unpredictable world, allowing memory and observation to accumulate across generations, each gesture, movement, and sound carrying significance for those who came after. Throughout these countless days and nights, humans began to notice the patterns of the skies, the shifting positions of the sun and moon, the changes in star formations across seasons and years. Though not yet understood in a formal sense, these observations provided early frameworks for orientation, timing, and expectation, an awareness that the world followed rhythms and cycles that could be observed, learned, and anticipated. Within this growing awareness, humans began to experiment subtly with the materials of the world, shaping stones, sticks, and natural fibers for specific purposes, creating implements that increased effectiveness in hunting, gathering, and protection. These tentative experiments marked the slow emergence of deliberate action, planning, and innovation. As bands traveled further and encountered new terrains, they observed how other groups of humans sharing resources, information, and techniques while maintaining caution and distance. Through these encounters, the first threads of wider social awareness began to form an understanding that others were capable of thought, action, and influence, and that cooperation or conflict could shape outcomes in meaningful ways. As these patterns of observation, experimentation, cooperation, and memory intertwined, humans began to develop the earliest notions of foresight and anticipation, the ability to plan movement, action, and strategy beyond the immediate moment, to predict and influence future outcomes, and to adapt to shifting circumstances and challenges. Within the rhythm of daily life, humans cultivated empathy, recognition of emotion and intention in others, memory of past events, and observation of the environment, all converging to create a subtle but profound expansion of cognitive and social capacities. Through repeated cycles of hunting, gathering, experimentation, and social interaction, humans developed increasing skill at shaping their world, using tools and strategies, observation and memory, collaboration and anticipation, creating a foundation for the complex behaviors that would define humanity. So chapter 10 unfolds as a meditation on the accumulation of knowledge, skill, socio-intelligence, and foresight, the intertwining of observation, memory, experimentation, cooperation, and empathy that slowly transformed early humans from solitary creatures responding to immediate stimuli into beings capable of planning, reflecting, adapting, and shaping their environment in deliberate ways. It marks another steady step along the long, unfolding journey of human awareness, ingenuity, and community, preparing the path for further discoveries and innovations that would shape generations to come. As the ancient world continued to unfold in slow, measured rhythms, our early ancestors found themselves moving further into the delicate balance between instinct and awareness, between immediate survival and the quiet stirrings of curiosity and imagination. For each day brought subtle lessons in observation, adaptation, and cooperation as they followed the movements of herds across plains, traced the hidden channels of rivers, and explored the dense forests that stretched far beyond familiar grounds. Through these repeated journeys, they developed an intimate knowledge of the land, learning where water pooled in dry seasons, which plants were safe to eat, which terrain hid danger, and how the weather whispered its coming changes. Each discovery was recorded silently in memory, gestures, and the rhythm of habitual movement, gradually forming a repository of understanding that guided their decisions and shaped their lives. As they observed the creatures around them, from the tiniest insects to the largest predators, humans began to notice patterns of behavior, repetition, and cause and effect, realizing in a subtle, instinctive way that actions could influence outcomes, and that careful observation combined with experimentation offered the possibility of control beyond sheer strength or speed. Within these growing capacities, humans began to experiment more deliberately with the materials of the world: stones shaped to cut or scrape, branches sharpened and bound for hunting or digging, bones used for breaking shells or cracking nuts, each attempt refining skill, patience, and understanding, marking a slow but steady emergence of ingenuity that would ripple across generations. Throughout these experiences, the social dimension of life grew increasingly significant, for survival depended not only on individual skill, but on the coordinated action of the group, observation of one another, movements, and mutual protection of the young, sick, and injured. Within these daily and nightly practices, subtle bonds of empathy, trust, and cooperation strengthened the social fabric, forming patterns of behavior that encourage sharing, communication, and collective vigilance. Invisible threads weaving resilience and security into the rhythm of life. As nights stretched long and fire remained, a fragile and partially understood ally humans gathered in close circles, huddled beneath cliffs or trees, listening to distant sounds of predator and prey, feeling the warmth of companions, noticing the smallest cues in posture, sound, and expression. They learned in ways both instinctive and deliberate that attention to others could preserve life and create comfort even in the face of uncertainty and danger. Over generations, these practices shaped not only survival skills, but also memory and cognition, the ability to recall past experience, anticipate future possibilities, and respond to subtle signals in the environment or from group members, forming the early scaffolding of planning, foresight, and social intelligence. Through countless cycles of hunting, gathering, experimentation, and observation, humans gradually expanded the range of their activities, traveling farther, exploring new terrains, observing new species, discovering freshwater sources, edible plants, and potential shelters. In doing so, they accumulated knowledge that became increasingly sophisticated, stored in the minds of individuals, and shared across the group, creating a collective understanding that no single member could possess alone. Within this accumulation of experience, curiosity continued to grow, a quiet tug toward exploration, experimentation, and understanding, encouraging risk assessment, careful observation, and creative problem solving. The subtle spark of imagination flickered in moments when they bent a branch in a new way, shaped a stone differently, or experimented with stored food in hidden, protected places. As the seasons turned through drought, heat, storms, and cold, humans adapted physically, cognitively, and socially, their muscles strengthening, their bodies adjusting to the demands of constant travel and varied climates, their minds expanding as memory, attention, observation, and imagination blended into a rhythm that guided movement, action, and social interaction. So chapter 11 gently unfolds as a meditation on the convergence of survival, awareness, cooperation, and curiosity, showing how early humans gradually transformed instinct into observation, skill into ingenuity, and social bonds into a framework for empathy, planning, and foresight. It marks another essential step along the long path from simple survival to the emergence of complex thought, community, and culture, a rhythm that will continue to shape the unfolding story of humanity through countless generations to come. As time continued its slow, unyielding rhythm across the landscapes of ancient forests, plains, and rivers, our early ancestors began to deepen their understanding of the world around them, not merely through survival, but through careful observation, reflection, and the subtle stirrings of curiosity that grew within each generation. For as they moved through familiar and unfamiliar terrain, they noted the patterns and the movements of herds, the hidden signs of predators, the growth cycles of plants, and the gentle shifts in weather, all recorded silently in memory and through gestures soft. Calls and repeated actions creating a living repository of knowledge that guided their steps and decisions through these repeated interactions with the environment. Humans began to notice the relationships between events, the subtle cause, and effect of action and response, the understanding that certain efforts yielded consistent results while others led to danger or loss. And in these realizations, the earliest forms of planning and foresight emerged, a quiet anticipation of what might occur and the preparation to meet. It guided not only by instinct, but also by memory, observation, and reflection. As bands of humans moved together across forests, plains, and along rivers, cooperation became increasingly essential for survival, the coordination of hunting and gathering, the protection of young and injured, the sharing of knowledge and resources, forming a rhythm of social interaction that strengthened both individual and group resilience. Through these repeated patterns, empathy, trust, and communication began to solidify. For noticing the needs, emotions, and intentions of others and responding appropriately ensured not only survival, but the maintenance of social cohesion and harmony. These early threads of social intelligence woven carefully across generations, creating the foundation for more complex behavior. Within these groups, humans began experimenting with materials in new ways, shaping stones, sticks, and bones to create implements that extended their reach and power, each small innovation refined through repetition, observation, and imitation, marking the slow emergence of ingenuity, curiosity, and the ability to influence their environment deliberately rather than merely react. And in the quiet moments of the night, when fire was a fragile flicker or absent entirely, they huddled together for warmth, security, and comfort, feeling the subtle power of companionship, the rhythm of shared breathing, the soft murmur of communication, the unspoken reassurance of connection that nurtured both emotional and physical resilience. As generations passed, these routines became ingrained, creating subtle rituals and patterns that reinforced learning memory, observation, and social bonds, each repetition strengthening the continuity of knowledge across time and space and allowing young members to internalize the skills, behaviors, and awareness necessary for survival. As the seasons cycled through rain, drought, heat, and cold, the accumulation of experience allowed humans to anticipate patterns in nature and adjust strategies accordingly, remembering which paths offered safety, which plants provided nourishment, which places offered shelter, and which behaviors provoked danger. And through this awareness, curiosity expanded a desire to explore, experiment, and understand, emerging slowly alongside the practical necessities of survival. So that early humans not only responded to the immediate world, but began to imagine possibilities beyond it, to test new methods to observe outcomes, and to refine techniques with deliberate intention. Within this growing sophistication of thought and action, the first inklings of culture began to emerge, the recognition that knowledge and skill could be shared, transmitted, and preserved, creating continuity across time and a scaffold for increasingly complex social, material, and cognitive life. So chapter 12 unfolds in the slow, patient rhythm of memory, observation, experimentation, cooperation, and curiosity, showing how early humans gradually transformed the raw experience of life into structured understanding, skill, and social intelligence, forming the subtle but enduring foundations for foresight, problem-solving, culture, and empathy that would ripple across generations and shape the continuing story of humanity in ways both profound and lasting. Across the vast, untamed landscapes of the ancient world. Our early ancestors continued to deepen the quiet rhythms of awareness, an adaptation that guided their lives through observation, reflection, and experimentation. For each day brought lessons not only in survival, but in the subtle dynamics of the world around them. As they traced the movements of animals, followed the hidden paths of rivers, explored dense forests and open plains, and observed the shifting patterns of plants and weather, these lessons recorded silently in memory, gestures, and the repetition of actions, slowly built a repository of knowledge that guided decision-making and shaped behavior over time. And as this awareness grew, humans began to notice the relationships between cause and effect, not only in the environment, but within their social interactions, the way cooperation could enhance success, how attention to the needs and emotions of others strengthened the bonds of the group, and how shared vigilance and coordinated effort reduced risk and increased the chance of survival. Through repeated cycles of movement, observation, and experimentation, humans refined their use of tools, selecting stones, branches, and bones with increasing discernment, shaping implements for cutting, scraping, digging, and hunting. Each attempt added to the collective understanding of technique and material properties, fostering a subtle sense of ingenuity and foresight. As bands traveled together across varied terrain, they discovered that knowledge could be communicated without formal language through gestures, soft calls, demonstrations, and the repetition of successful behaviors, allowing the lessons of experience to pass across individuals and generations. This continuity of skill and awareness strengthened the cohesion and resilience of the group. Within these emerging patterns of social interaction, empathy began to flourish, the recognition that attending to the well-being and intentions of others could create harmony and ensure mutual survival, so that humans gradually internalized social rules, memory, observation, and anticipation, allowing them to cooperate in increasingly complex ways even without explicit communication. As nights stretched long beneath starlit skies, humans huddled together for warmth, protection, and companionship, sharing the subtle comfort of presence and the faint glow of fire when it was available. These moments reinforced trust, cooperation, and social bonds, teaching young members through example the rhythms of care, attention, and vigilance necessary for survival. Through generations, the accumulation of knowledge, experience, and memory created a growing capacity for foresight, problem solving, and planning, the ability to anticipate animal movements, resource availability, and environmental changes, and to adjust behavior accordingly, a quiet yet profound expansion of cognitive skill. Alongside these practical skills, curiosity continued to grow, a gentle tug toward exploration, experimentation, and understanding, encouraging the testing of new methods, the shaping of materials in innovative ways, and the careful observation of results with increasing discernment and patience. Through these small but persistent efforts, humans began to cultivate the earliest inklings of culture, recognizing that knowledge could be preserved, transmitted, and refined across time, and that the rhythm of social life could support not only survival, but also learning, teaching, and creative expression as seasons cycled through rain, heat, drought, and cold. Humans adapted physically, socially, and cognitively, muscles strengthening from constant travel, bodies adjusting to varied climates, memory sharpening, attention expanding, and imagination flickering ever more steadily within the mind, allowing for subtle planning, innovation, and anticipation of future events. So chapter 13 gently unfolds as a meditation on the intertwining of survival, awareness, social intelligence, memory, observation, experimentation, and curiosity, showing how early humans gradually transformed instinct into deliberate thought, skill into ingenuity, and social bonds into empathy and shared memory. Through these slow, patient rhythms, they formed the enduring foundation for foresight, problem-solving, culture, and community, marking another essential step in the long journey from simple survival to the rich, interconnected experience that defines humanity, and setting the stage for the next phases of discovery, innovation, and understanding that will continue to shape generations to come. As the slow, unfolding rhythms of the ancient world continued across forests, plains, and river valleys, early humans moved with increasing awareness and intent, guided by memory, observation, and the subtle stirrings of curiosity that had grown within each generation. For survival had become more than the immediate quest for food, water, and safety. It was now intertwined with the quiet practices of learning, teaching, observing, and experimenting. As bands traveled together across varied terrain, they observed not only the movements of animals, but the shifts in weather, the growth cycles of plants, and the hidden signs of danger in the landscape. Each day becoming a careful study of cause and effect, each movement recorded in memory, gestures, and the repeated rhythms of habitual action, creating a repository of understanding that guided decisions and shaped the actions of individuals and the group alike. And as they experimented with stones, branches, bones, and other materials to create implements for cutting, scraping, digging, and hunting, they began to refine technique, attention, and patience, noticing small differences in shape, texture, and weight that could produce more effective results. These repeated observations and adjustments fostering ingenuity, foresight, and the earliest forms of Throughout these efforts, humans also cultivated the subtle dynamics of social awareness, recognizing that survival depended not only on individual skill, but also on cooperation, coordination, and empathy, noticing the needs, emotions, and intentions of others, adjusting behavior accordingly, and learning that care for the young, sick, and injured ensured the continuation of the group. These early patterns of social intelligence, weaving a rhythm of connection, trust, and shared vigilance that strengthened bonds and reinforced the transmission of knowledge across generations. And as nights stretched long beneath the starlit sky, humans huddled together for warmth, protection, and companionship, feeling the subtle comfort of presence and the reassurance of shared attention. These moments providing both physical security and emotional sustenance, teaching young members the rhythms of cooperation, care, and vigilance that would become second nature through repetition. As memory and experience accumulated across years and generations, the capacity for foresight, planning, and anticipation expanded. Humans began to predict animal behavior, resource availability, and environmental shifts, adjusting movement, action, and social strategy accordingly. And alongside these practical skills, curiosity continued to grow. The gentle urge to explore, experiment, and understand the world, encouraging small innovations and careful observation, the shaping of materials in new ways, and the testing of new strategies, all contributing to a slow, steady increase in cognitive complexity within these rhythms of observation, experimentation, cooperation, and memory. The first inklings of culture began to take shape, the recognition that knowledge, skill, and experience could be transmitted, refined, and preserved across time, creating continuity and laying the foundation for increasingly complex social, material, and cognitive life. As seasons cycled through heat, drought, rain, and cold, humans adapted physically, socially, and cognitively, strengthening muscles, adjusting to varied climates, expanding attention, sharpening memory, and nurturing imagination, allowing subtle planning, foresight, and problem solving to emerge and take root. And so, Chapter 14 flows through the patient accumulation of skill, awareness, social intelligence, observation, memory, curiosity, and experimentation, showing how early humans gradually transformed instinct into deliberate thought, social bonds into empathy, foresight into planning, memory into shared culture and experience, marking another crucial step along the slow, steady journey from mere survival to complex, interconnected human life, a rhythm that will continue to shape the unfolding story of humanity through generations to come, and prepare the ground for future discovery, innovation. And understanding that will expand the boundaries of thought, community, and existence across time, as the long, measured currents of time continued to flow across the landscapes of forests, plains, and rivers. Our early ancestors reached a point where the quiet rhythms of observation, memory, experimentation, and social interaction began to coalesce into a subtle but profound transformation. For survival was no longer merely a reactive process dictated solely by immediate needs. It had become entwined with foresight, planning, creativity, and the shared awareness of others, each day bringing lessons not only in tracking, foraging, and protection, but also in understanding the delicate interplay between individuals, environment, and community. As bands moved together across varied terrain, they observed the hidden signs of predators, the patterns of animal movements, the growth cycles of plants, and the shifting moods of weather, recording each insight and memory, gestures, and the repeated rhythms of habitual action, so that over time, knowledge accumulated within individuals and spread across groups, creating a living intergenerational repository that guided decisions and refined behavior. Through these experiences, early humans developed increasing skill at shaping the world around them. Stones, branches, bones, and other natural materials fashioned for cutting, scraping, digging, hunting, and protection. Each refinement emerging from patient observation, trial and error, and imitation, marking the slow, steady development of ingenuity, technical skill, and foresight. As these practical abilities matured, so too did social intelligence, for survival required not only coordination during hunting and gathering, but also attention to the needs, emotions, and intentions of others, teaching early humans empathy, cooperation, trust, and shared vigilance. These invisible threads binding individuals into resilient groups, capable of withstanding threats, scarcity, and environmental challenges within the quiet circles of firelight or under the vast night sky. Humans experienced the first inklings of reflection, wonder, and anticipation, noticing not only the patterns of the natural world, but also the subtle stirrings of thought and imagination within themselves. As memory and experience intertwined, humans began to anticipate outcomes, plan actions, experiment with materials and strategies, observe the results, and refine methods, thus laying the foundation for problem-solving, innovation, and the transmission of knowledge across generations. Through repeated cycles of movement, observation, experimentation, social interaction, and reflection, humans cultivated a sense of foresight, the understanding that choices and actions could influence the future, and that deliberate planning could enhance survival and well-being. Alongside these practical and cognitive developments, curiosity and exploration continued to flourish, a quiet, steady drive to test new ideas, shape materials in innovative ways, notice subtle differences in the environment, and experiment with methods that might yield better results. Within this delicate balance of survival, awareness, skill, empathy, and curiosity, the earliest forms of culture began to emerge. Simple patterns of behavior repeated across time. Rituals of care, protection, and cooperation. Sharing knowledge, observing cycles of nature, and passing understanding silently from one generation to the next, forming continuity and creating the scaffolding for increasingly complex social, material, and cognitive life. As the seasons cycled through heat, cold, rain, and drought, humans adapted physically. Socially and cognitively, muscles strengthened from constant travel, attention sharpened, imagination flickered, and memory expanded, allowing for subtle planning, problem-solving, innovation, and the quiet construction of social frameworks that guided group life and individual action. So chapter 15, the final chapter of this episode, unfolds as a meditation on the convergence of survival, skill, observation, curiosity, empathy, foresight, and culture, showing how early humans gradually transformed raw experience into structured understanding, instinct into thought, action into innovation, and social bonds into enduring frameworks of cooperation and learning, marking the culmination of the long, unfolding journey of the dawn of humanity, where every small discovery, shared insight, careful observation, and active cooperation built the foundation for all that was yet to come. From the quiet flicker of firelight to the shaping of tools, from the careful watchfulness of one over another to the collective movement across landscapes, the rhythms of early human life harmonized into a complex, interconnected pattern of awareness, ingenuity, and social intelligence, preparing the stage for the next chapter of human evolution, where curiosity, creativity, and cooperation would continue to expand the boundaries of understanding, capability, and community across the vast, ever-changing world.